Nora Vance had sold her wedding china, her husband's good watch, and the last acre of level ground her family ever owned, and she still had only $1,209 to her name. And then her brother's letter came, on a lawyer's letterhead, and it told her the house on Depot Street was sold and she was to be out by the end of the week. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and packing tape. Outside, in the gravel lot, a car that was no longer hers idled in a stranger's hands. Dale had left her one thing with her name on the deed, a closed diner at the far end of a 2-lane nobody drove anymore, a low brick place the county valued at $1. When she finally pried up the loose plank in the pantry floor, she found something her husband had spent 34 years quietly building. She had kept the books for that diner once, before the sickness, before the long years of nursing him, before the days she gave away one at a time. She could still read a ledger in the dark. For a long moment, she just stood there in the empty house and breathed. The last box was taped and stacked by the door. Everything she still owned fit in the trunk of a borrowed sedan and a canvas satchel she wore across her body like a woman who had lost the war but kept the coat. She was 54 years old. She had not cried when the auctioneer's gavel came down on the house, and she did not cry now. She looked once at the ring of clean wallpaper where the wall clock used to hang. The one bright circle the years had not faded, and she thought that a life was a lot like that, a clean pale ring of nothing, marking the shape of a thing that used to hang there. The deed was folded in the satchel. She had read it twice. The Ridgeline Diner, Lot 2, Route 9, Greenbrier County, West Virginia. Assessed value, for tax purposes, $1. Dale had slid it across the funeral home table between them the week after they buried Sam, and he had done it with the soft sorry face he wore at funerals and closings both, the face a man makes when he has already won and wants you to feel he is doing you a kindness. "It's yours, Nora," he'd said. Sam's old place. "County's condemning that whole stretch anyway. I don't want the headache. Nobody wants it." He had taken the house on Depot Street. He had taken the settlement, the car, the small insurance money Sam had left, all of it folded into the estate he had made himself executor of while she was still numb by the graveside. And he had handed her a $1 diner the way you hand a dog the bone with no meat, so it will feel it got something. She drove the 4 hours west into the hills with the radio off. She had meant to keep it on, but the announcer's voice had felt like a hand on her shoulder from someone who did not know her, and she could not bear it. So she turned the knob until the hum died and there was only the road and the ridgelines rising out of the haze like the backs of animals asleep. Autumn had already come to the high country. The maples had gone to rust and the hemlocks stood black-green against them, and the road went from 4 lanes to 2 to a cracked 2-lane that was not maintained so much as tolerated. Sam had driven this road for 34 years, out before dawn to start the grill, home after dark with his apron folded on the seat. She had ridden beside him 1,000 mornings before the sickness put her at his bedside instead. She had kept the books before any of it. That was the thing she kept coming back to, mile after mile, the way your tongue keeps finding a broken tooth. She had a bookkeeping certificate from the vocational school in Lewisburg and 11 good years running the numbers for the diner and 2 other Route 9 businesses besides, closing months clean to the penny, catching the small errors nobody else could see. Then, the doctor had found the shadow on Sam's lung, and the good years had turned into the nursing years. And Sam had said it made no sense for her to keep chasing other people's columns when he needed her, and she had believed him. Because he said it gently, and because that was the arithmetic of a marriage in its last long season, and she had folded the ledgers of her own working life shut, and set them on a high shelf. 9 years of nursing him. She could still balance a column in her head faster than a machine. She had simply not been asked to in a very long time. The road climbed. She passed the turnoff to the little Methodist church where she and Sam had been married, its 1 bell and its gravel lot, and the low place where the creek ran clear and cold over flat stones. She passed the shuttered feed store and the hardware that still, somehow, kept its lights on. Every mile of it was a mile she had thought she'd left behind on purpose. She had wanted, in the numb months after the funeral, only to be somewhere Sam had never been. Somewhere that would not ambush her with him around every bend. And now the town where they had built their whole quiet life was Dale's to sell off in lots. And the diner was the thing he'd thrown away, and she was driving back up into the one place on earth that still had her name anywhere near it, because it was the only roof left she could claim. The plan was simple, and she said it out loud to the windshield so it would feel like a decision instead of a defeat. She would clean the diner. She would find a buyer, or a scrapper, or a man who wanted the brick and the copper pipe out of the walls. She would take whatever dollars the worthless thing could be turned into, and she would be gone by morning. She was good at leaving now. She had gotten a great deal of practice at it lately, and the trick, she had learned, was to not look at the walls. The diner came up on her the way it always had, all at once, after the long straight stretch where Route 9 ran flat between the fields. Low red brick gone soft at the mortar. A flat roof with a sway-backed middle. A row of front windows, 2 of them cracked and sealed with yellowed tape, and above the door a metal sign so weathered you could barely read Ridgeline in the ghost of its old paint. A gravel apron where the trucks used to pull in at 5 in the morning for eggs and black coffee before the mills. She parked the borrowed sedan on that apron and sat with her hands on the wheel and did not get out. The engine ticked as it cooled. Somewhere across the road a wind moved through the dry corn and the whole valley seemed to breathe out. And in the front window, on the sill behind the cracked glass, there was a lamp. A plain kerosene lamp, brass base gone soft with tarnish, glass chimney clouded with 2 years of dust. It was not lit, of course it was not lit. No one had cooked here in 2 years. Since the week Sam got too sick to stand at the grill, but it sat exactly where it had always sat, dead center of the window that faced the road, angled a quarter turn, so its light, when it had a light, would fall out across the highway toward anyone driving that lonesome stretch after dark. She remembered it lit. She remembered coming out to close up with Sam in the winters. The 2 of them the last warm thing on 9 miles of empty road, and Sam trimming that wick before he trimmed the grill lights, always in that order, the lamp first. "You don't light it for the night somebody comes, Nora," he used to say. "You light it for all the nights they don't. So it'll already be lit on the one night they do." She got out of the car. The cold came down off the ridge and found the gaps in her coat. She stood in the gravel Sam had graded and raked with his own hands, and she looked at the dead lamp in the window, and, against every plan she had made, something in her chest pulled tight and would not let go. The key was on top of the meter box by the back door, where it had always been, and where a thief with any sense would have looked first, and where no thief had ever bothered to look because there was nothing in a closed diner on a condemned road worth the drive. The lock turned hard, and then gave. The door swung in on the smell of cold grease and cedar and old coffee, and she stood on the threshold of the one room where she had spent the best years of her marriage, and she made herself walk in. It was one long room, a counter with red vinyl stools, 4 booths, their vinyl split and taped, a pie case gone milky, a chalkboard where the last day's specials still ghosted in her own faded chalk, and behind the counter the cold black grill and the lean-to kitchen and pantry beyond. A wall of shelves Sam had built himself, sagging now, filled with cloth-bound books she had always assumed were his order books, deliveries, produce, the daily flat business of a man who fed a highway for a living. His canvas cook's apron still hung on its peg by the kitchen door, shaped to the ghost of his shoulders. An enamel thermos on the shelf. A Folgers coffee can on the back counter, red gone to rust brown, heavy-looking. Its plastic lid cracked. She walked the length of the room slowly, touching things. Because you cannot help it. In a dead husband's place, your hands go out ahead of your grief. The thermos still smelled faintly of the coffee he drank black and scalding at 4 in the morning. The apron on the peg held the shape of him so exactly that, for a moment, in the low light. She thought a man was standing by the grill, and her heart went sideways in her chest. On the shelf, propped, there was a photograph she had forgotten, herself young and laughing behind that counter, an order pad in her hand, and Sam beside her not laughing, but looking at her the way he looked at things he intended to keep. And a second photograph, smaller. A boy she did not know, maybe 16, gaunt, holding a plate of eggs up to the camera with both hands like an offering, and on the back in Sam's blocky hand, first hot meal in a week. Wouldn't say his name. She stood a long while with that one. The pantry she did not go into. The door was shut. It was where Sam had kept the dry stores, the flour and the coffee and the big cans, and it was also where he had sat those last 2 years on a stool between the shelves with the account books open on a crate. When he was too weak to stand at the grill but too stubborn to stay home, doing something back there she had never asked about, because she had been too busy counting his pills and his breaths. She had thought he was just sitting where the diner smell still lived. She understood now, 24 months too late, that a man does not carry a lamp and a coffee can into a pantry to sit in the dark. He goes there to keep an account. Nora had not understood that while he lived. She understood it now, and the understanding put her hand flat against the cold pantry door. She would deal with all of it in the morning. Tonight, she only wanted to be warm and to sleep and to not think. She found the old space heater in the lean-to and got it going, and she sat on a red vinyl stool at the counter with her coat still on, and watched the one coil glow orange, and for the first time in a long time the shaking in her hands began to settle. That was when she noticed the plank. The pantry floor she could see through the open lean-to door was wide pine board, hand-laid, dark with a decade of Sam's boots going back and forth to the flour bins. And just inside the pantry threshold, in the spot where a man would stand 10,000 mornings to lift a sack down, one board sat a half-inch proud of the others. She had crossed to shut the pantry door against the cold, and her foot had rocked on it, that small betraying give of a thing not nailed down. She looked at it for a while. She told herself it was nothing, a warped board, a swollen nail. But Sam had laid this floor, and Sam did not leave a board loose. He was a man who nailed the world down. She found the flat pry bar in the tool drawer under the register where it had lived their whole marriage. She fit it into the seam. She breathed once, the way you do before you lift a thing you are afraid of, and she pried the plank up. Under it, in the dry dark between the joists, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string, there were more of the cloth-bound books. Not order books. She could see that at once from the first one she lifted out and untied and opened by the orange coil of the heater, because the pages were not columns of produce and deliveries. They were names. Names and dates and dollar amounts, and beside each one a single line in Sam's blocky, careful hand. Odell Suggs. February, slept in his truck in the lot 3 nights, ashamed to come in. Left him a plate on the sill. $0. He tips double now, won't hear otherwise. Marta Hines. 2 winters. Coffee's on the house, tell her it's the pot going stale. A boy, no last name. Off the county road in the rain, 16 or so. Fed him. Never once made him say thank you. She turned the pages and her hands began to shake again, but for a different reason now. There were dozens of names, hundreds, 34 years of them. 1 highway's worth of quiet hungers, and the one man who had stood at a grill at 4 a.m. to meet every one of them. A trucker laid off and too proud to say so. A family whose power had been shut off in January. A boy who had aged out of the county's care with a garbage bag of clothes and nowhere on earth to go. Beside each name a dollar figure, and most of the figures were zeros, and the zeros were the ones that undid her, because a zero meant he had given it, and written down that he had given it, and written down that no one was to know. If you've made it this far into Nora's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. She read until the heater's coil dimmed on its dying cord and she had to jostle it back to life. She kept a hand pressed flat to the pages as she read, the way you hold a hand over a wound, and the names went by her one at a time. Each one a morning her husband had come in before the dark lifted and started the grill for somebody's worst week. A March entry, whole Pruitt family, 6 of them, no power, no food. Fed them out the back door 2 weeks so the county wouldn't take the kids over an empty cupboard. There was a whole page for the winter the mill closed, a column of the laid off, and beside them what he had carried them. A hot breakfast, a bag of day-old bread, a 20 folded into a delivery box. There were entries that were only a date and a name and the word sat, and she came to understand that sat meant her husband had sat in a booth all night across from a person so they would not be alone with something, and had written down only that he sat, and nothing of what it cost him. He had never told her any of it. 9 years of nursing, the 2 of them alone in a quiet house with nothing to do but talk, and not one word about the highway he was quietly holding up with his own 2 hands. She had counted his pills and read to him and turned him in the bed, and thought there was nothing left of Sam Vance she did not know. And he had let her think it, rather than say a single thing that might have sounded like a man collecting credit for his kindness. Tell her it's the pot going stale, he had written beside Marta's name. It was the whole of him in 5 words. She read the whole first ledger and half the second, and somewhere in the second one the names began to include people she knew. The woman who cleaned the church, to whom Sam had quietly given a job wiping the diner counters on the mornings she needed to be out of her house, Nora had thought that was just Sam being soft about the payroll. Odell Suggs, who fixed everyone's furnace for cost and would not be thanked, and beside his name the line, fed him 3 winters when he had nothing. He's warmed 40 houses free since. He keeps count. She had worked in this diner. She had thought it was just a hard little stop on a dying road. She had not known she had spent her best years inside a quiet economy of debts that no one ever collected, and that her husband had been the bank. At the bottom of the cavity, under the last of the ledgers, there was a coffee can. Not the one on the back counter, a second one, older, the paper label worn to nothing. She lifted it out, and it was heavy in a way that a can of coffee is not heavy. She pried the lid. It was full of money. Folded bills, banded in 10s and 20s, soft with handling, and tucked down the side a blue passbook from the Greenbrier County Farmers Bank, and when she opened it the last stamped line read, balance, $34,806. $34,806. A man who had died with an old truck and an apron on a peg, a man whose diner the county assessed at $1 and was moving to condemn, had put away, a little at a time, across a working life, $34,806, and he had not spent it on himself, not on the treatment that might have bought him another year, not on a single soft thing. It was still here. It was waiting. She did the arithmetic without meaning to, because that was how her mind had always worked. The diner the county called $1. The account beneath it, 34,000 and change, more than 34,000 times what the deed said the place was worth. And that was before the land itself, the corner lot and the 9 flat acres a highway developer would price in the hundreds of thousands the day the state paved the bypass through. The math of it was staggering, but the math was not the point, and she knew that even as the numbers stacked themselves up neat in her head. The point was the last stamped line and the soft folded bills and the fact that a man had gone without, quietly for decades, so that the going without would be there in a coffee can for whoever pulled off the highway next with nothing. He had not been saving money, he had been saving a door open. And folded inside the passbook, in an envelope gone soft as cloth, with her name on the front in his blocky hand, Nora, there was a letter. She could not open it. Not yet. She held it in both hands, and she sat back on the cold pantry floor by the open grave in the boards, and she looked up toward the dark lamp in the far window, and she understood, all at once and far too late, that she had spent 9 years nursing a man she thought she knew to the bone, and that the deepest thing about him had been sitting in a pantry the whole time she was counting his heartbeats, keeping a light lit for a highway she had forgotten to look out at. She slept that night in a booth, with the letter unopened in her lap and the ledgers stacked around her like a wall. In the morning the valley was white, with the first hard frost, and there was a car on the gravel apron that was not hers. It was a big new SUV, dealer plate still in the back window, mud-free tires, and leaning against it with his phone in his hand was her brother, Dale Coyle. 51 years old, good haircut, a soft gray blazer over a pressed shirt, boots that had never seen a working morning in their life. He had driven 4 hours. Dale did not drive 4 hours for a $1 diner. He looked up from his phone as she came out onto the walk, and he smiled the way he smiled when he was about to be reasonable at you. "Morning, Nora," he said. "You're a hard woman to find." "You gave me this place," she said. "You knew exactly where I was." He laughed, easy, the way he laughed at men across a table before he took something from them. "I did," he said. "I did give it to you. And I want to talk to you about that, because it turns out I might have been a little hasty." There was a second person in the SUV, Renee, his wife, who got out and stood by the door with her arms crossed against the cold, taking in the diner, the lot, the fields behind it, the way a woman takes in a property she is about to price. Dale told it to her plainly, because Dale always told you the price plainly once he was sure he held the cards. The state had finally funded the Route 9 bypass, the one they'd talked about for 20 years. It was coming through, and the interchange was going in a quarter mile from where they stood, and this diner, worthless as a building, sat on the one corner lot that the frontage and the ramp both needed, and a development group out of Charleston was quietly buying up the whole junction, and Dale had realized, a little late, that he had given away the one thing in the estate that turned out to be worth something after all. "I'm not here to fight you," he said, and spread his hands, reasonable, warm. "I'm here to help you. You can't do anything with this. You've got no money, no way to hold the back taxes, no reason to freeze in a condemned building all winter. Sign it back to me. I'm the executor anyway. It's practically a paperwork fix. And I'll handle the buyers. And I'll give you a fair cut. $10,000, Nora, for a place worth $1. That's a good day. That's the best day you've had in a year, and we both know it." She stood on the walk Sam had swept, and behind her in the diner were the ledgers, and the coffee can, and the passbook, and the letter she had not yet opened, and she looked at the brother she had grown up beside, who had stood next to her at their parents' funerals and at Sam's. And she was surprised to find that she was not afraid of him, and that the not being afraid felt like the first warm thing in a long cold season. "I'll think about it," she said. That was not what Dale expected. He had expected relief. He had expected gratitude even. His smile stayed, but something behind it recalculated. "Don't think too long," he said. "These people don't wait. And a widow alone out here on a dead road, that's a lot of things that could go wrong. The county could condemn it out from under you next month. You'd walk away with nothing instead of 10. He left his card on the window ledge with a pen laid across it, as if she might sign it there in the frost. He backed the big SUV down the gravel apron and pulled out onto the highway, and Renee's face in the window was the last thing to disappear down the straight. Nora stood on the walk after the sound of the engine had faded down the road, and she thought about the years. She thought about how the brother who had just threatened her, gently, with a smile, in her dead husband's lot, was the same boy who had once held her hand crossing this same highway when they were small. She thought about how easily she had let him make himself executor while she was numb, had signed where he pointed, and thanked him for handling it. The way you thank a man for taking a weight when you are too tired to see he is taking the whole cart. And she thought that the cruelest thing Dale had ever done was not taking the house, or the car, or the settlement. It was doing it all with that sorry funeral face, so that for 2 years she had believed he was being kind. Sam had spent a whole life proving that the county's dollar assessments were lies, She had simply forgotten she was on the ledger too. Nora went back inside and she opened the letter. She read it standing by the counter with the gray morning coming up behind the taped glass, and she read it 3 times before the words stopped swimming. And then she sat down on Sam's stool by the grill and pressed the soft envelope to her mouth the way Bet would later press her glasses, and she stayed that way a long time while the heater ticked and the valley breathed outside. The letter had answered a question she had carried for so long she had stopped feeling its weight, whether all those years at his bedside. When she had felt herself shrinking down to a nurse and a bookkeeper he no longer needed, he had still seen her haul. He had. He always had. She had spent 9 years believing she had disappeared into the caregiving, and the man she cared for had known exactly who she was the whole time, and had left the proof of it in a place she would have to come up the road and pry out of the floor to find. The development man came 2 days later. Bright quilted vest, boots with the price of them still shining, a smile like a screen door that would not quite latch. His name was Prentice, and his handshake was a salesman's handshake, dry and quick and gone. He walked the property like he already owned it. He stood in the long room and looked at the split booths and the dead lamp and the cold black grill, and he said, "Well, it's got bones," in the voice of a man who meant it had nothing. He offered her $9,000. He said it the way you drop a coin in a cup, generous and a little bored. When she did not take it, he told her that of course she should think about her situation. A widow alone, no income, the back taxes coming due, the road that the county might just decide it could finally afford to condemn, the fire marshal who would surely find a dozen violations in a building this old. He smiled through all of it. He was, she understood, telling her exactly how it would go if she made him unhappy, and telling her with a smile so that afterward no one could say he had threatened her. "You seem like a sensible woman," Prentice said, and it was the most menacing thing he had said yet, because in his mouth sensible meant biddable, meant a woman who would take a number and go, and she had spent the last 2 years being sensible in exactly that way, and it had cost her everything she owned. She stood behind the counter and let him talk. She had learned, in the long, slow settling of Sam's estate, that a person will tell you the whole shape of their intention if you simply decline to fill the silence for them. Prentice could not stand the silence. He kept adding to his offer without her having said a word, and every problem he named was a problem he was promising to create if she refused. She watched him do it, and she thought, with a bookkeeper's cold clarity, that she was watching a man show her his whole ledger without knowing she could read. $45,000, he said finally, at the door, as though the number pained him. "That's my ceiling. That's more than your brother told you it was worth, isn't it? He's not being straight with you, ma'am. I am." He was not. But he had told her one true thing without meaning to. Dale had lied about the number. If a Charleston group would pay $45,000 for this corner through Dale, then this corner was worth a great deal more than $45,000. Because men like Prentice did not lead with their ceiling, and men like Dale did not drive 4 hours to pocket a finder's fee on 10. She had kept books for 3 Route 9 businesses for 11 years before the sickness. She knew what a highway interchange did to the land beside it, and she knew that the number a developer says out loud is the floor of a room whose ceiling he is standing on. She told Prentice she would think about it. He left his card next to Dale's on the window ledge, and now there were 2. That night she did what she had not done in 9 years. She cleared a booth, and she lit the kerosene lamp, cleaned the chimney with the hem of her shirt, trimmed the wick, touched a match to it, and set it back on the sill in the window that faced the road. And by its light and the heater's glow she opened the ledgers and she went to work. It came back to her the way a language comes back, all at once, in the hands before the head. She squared the ledger's spines and set out the coffee can cash in banded stacks, and she began to reconcile, and the years of it, the folded shut years on the high shelf, came down off that shelf and opened themselves. She was fast. She was faster than she had been at 30, because she had a patience now she had not owned then. The patience of a woman with nothing left to prove and nobody watching over her shoulder to tell her the work was small. She matched every deposit in the passbook to a line in the ledger. She traced the withdrawals, the small even ones that came each month, the larger ones that came whenever a name appeared with a real dollar figure beside it. She built, in a night, a complete accounting of her husband's secret life, and when she was done she looked at the columns she had made and she understood that she had just done. For him, the one service no one else in the county could have done, she had proven, to the penny, that the poorest man on the highway had spent 34 years quietly being its richest, and had balanced every account but his own. She was a bookkeeper. It was the one thing the years of nursing had not managed to take from her, because they had never thought it was worth taking. She reconciled Sam's 34 years. She matched the coffee can cash to the passbook deposits. She followed the small, even withdrawals that fed the highways hungry. And she found, tucked in the back of the last ledger, folded twice, a document with a county seal on it, and when she read it, her hands went still. It was a deed of trust, an irrevocable one. Recorded, filed notarized 24 years ago at the Greenbrier County Courthouse. Her husband had put the diner and the 9 acres behind it, the whole worthless corner, into a permanent charitable trust that could never be sold for profit, never be developed into a truck plaza or an interchange, never be assembled into a highway junction by anyone with a quilted vest and a dealer plate, and that named as its sole purpose the feeding and sheltering of anyone who came off Route 9 in need, for as long as the law of West Virginia stood. The Charleston Group could not buy it. Dale could not sell it. It had been protected in perpetuity before Nora had even married the man she thought she had known to the bone. She sat with that a long time, the lamp steady in the window, and then she laughed, a small surprised sound in the empty room, because she understood at last that Sam, who had never once in his life raised his voice, had reached forward 24 years through the dark and quietly, without a word to anyone, taken the whole thing off the table before the men who counted everything ever got to the table at all. But she did not know the law well enough to be sure, and she did not have $100 for a lawyer. So in the morning she drove down the highway into town, to the one street with a hardware store and a shuttered feed store and a church, and she went into the hardware and asked the man behind the counter, an old man, careful hands, a pilot light burning steady in the little space heater at his feet, whether there was anyone in the county who could read a legal paper for her. The old man looked at her a long moment. "You're Sam Vance's widow," he said. It was not a question. I'd know that satchel anywhere. He carried one just like it. He set down what he was holding. "I'm Odell Suggs," he said. "Your Sam fed me out the back of that diner 3 winters when I had nothing but shame and an empty truck, and never once let me thank him. Told me it was the pot going stale. I've warmed 40 houses free since, for cost, and I keep count, and it don't come near what I owe. You go see Bet Aldridge. Tell her Sam's widow needs her. She'll not charge you a dime, and don't you insult her by offering." Bet Aldridge was 71 years old, a retired county lawyer with reading glasses on a chain and a leather case worn soft at the corners, and she read the trust document standing in her kitchen, and then she took her glasses off and pressed them to her lips for a moment before she spoke. "I filed this," she said. "I filed this for your husband 24 years ago. He came in with cash and a coffee can, and he said, 'Bet, I want to fix it so nobody can ever undo it, not my kin, not the county, not some man in a truck.' And we fixed it." She looked at Nora over the top of her glasses. "He didn't owe me the fee. I owed him. He fed my grandson every morning the year the boy was sleeping rough, and never sent a bill and never told a soul, and that boy is a nurse in Charleston now with children of his own. So no. This land cannot be developed. Not by your brother, not by any group out of the city, not by anyone. It's done. It was done before they ever drew a line on a map." Bet made coffee and sat her down at the kitchen table and walked her through it, line by line, in the plain, patient way of a woman who had spent 40 years turning the law into English for frightened people. The trust ran with the land, she explained. It did not belong to Nora, it belonged to the corner itself, in perpetuity, held by a small county charitable trust that still met twice a year in a church basement. No sale could break it. No executor could vote it away. A developer could buy the deed to the building 100 times over and own nothing but the right to stand in a closed diner and look at a corner he could never pave. Your Sam didn't just refuse to sell, Beth said, and there was something like awe in her voice, the professional admiring a clean piece of work. He made it so that refusing was permanent. He took the temptation away from every soul who'd come after him, including whatever kin might get their hands on the paperwork. He knew people are weak in a hard winter. So he made it so the corner couldn't be sold even by somebody who was starving. She set down her cup. I have practiced law in this county since 1979. That is the single most loving legal document I have ever read, and he wrote most of it himself, on a legal pad, and made me clean it up. Nora drove back up the highway, and the frost had burned off, and the fields were gold and rust in the long afternoon light, and she found she was not thinking about the money. She was thinking about the lamp. There was a boy on the walk when she got back. He was 18, maybe 19, lean, in a canvas coat a size too big, and a knit cap, wood dust on his boots, a battered pack at his feet. He watched the door of the car open the way a person watches an exit they might need. He did not come toward her. He said, from the walk, in a voice that had practiced not asking for anything, "This is Sam's place." And then, quieter, he said, "If I ever had nowhere, I could come here." He said, the door wasn't locked. He swallowed. I didn't know he'd passed. I can go. What's your name? Nora said. Theo. She knew the name. She had read it 2 nights ago by lamplight, on a page near the end of the last ledger, in Sam's blocky hand. Theo, aged out in the spring. Garbage bag of clothes. Won't take help if you offer it, so don't offer it, just leave the light on. She stood in the gravel Sam had raked, and she looked at this boy who had walked to a dead man's diner because a dead man had once told him the door wasn't locked, and she understood that she was standing exactly where her husband had stood 100 times, and that there was only one thing to say. And that saying, it was going to be the thing that saved her own life as much as his. You're not going anywhere, she said. There's soup on the heater and it's too much for one. Bring your pack in out of the cold. He ate 3 bowls and tried not to let her see how hungry he was, and she pretended not to see. And that pretending was its own small mercy that she had learned the shape of from a dead man's ledger. He told her a little, in pieces, the way a boy tells you things when he has decided to trust you but has not decided to admit it. He had been in the county's care since he was small, and had aged out in the spring on his 18th birthday with a garbage bag and a bus token, the way they all did. He had met Sam 2 winters back. When Sam had found him sleeping behind the diner in the lot and had not called anyone, had only come out the next morning with a plate of eggs and a thermos and sat with him a while and told him about a diner on a highway where the door was never locked. He never made me say thank you, Theo said, and his voice did a thing then that he clearly hated. Everybody always makes you say thank you. He never did. Not once. He looked at the grill. I didn't come to take anything, he said. I just didn't have anywhere the light was on. She gave him the little room off the back of the pantry, where Sam had kept a cot for the long nights. She had not been able to go into the pantry for herself at first, but she could open the room beyond it for him, and there was a rightness in that she did not examine too closely, that the room where her husband had kept his cot on the nights he was too sick to drive home would be the room where a lost boy finally slept through the night. She made the cot up with wool blankets from the storeroom, and she lit a candle against the cold, and she told him good night, and he said it back like a word in a language he was just learning. He slept through the night. In the morning she found him already up, hauling the old propane tanks out and cleaning the grill hood without being asked, his breath white in the cold. And he had swept the walk. He had swept the walk the way Sam swept it, and she stood in the doorway and watched him and had to hold the frame. The word went up and down the highway the way word does in a county where everyone owes everyone something. Marta Hines came first, the woman who had cleaned the church, with a casserole and a question. "Have you eaten?" And did not wait for the answer before she was inside stacking the pantry shelves. Marta had a way of moving through a kitchen that asked no permission, and she talked the whole time, low and easy, about nothing. About the weather and the price of heating oil and whose grandbaby had been born, and Nora understood that the talk was a kindness too, a way of filling a cold room with the ordinary sound of a life so that a grieving woman would not have to. "Your Sam left me a light in my worst winter," Marta said, not looking up from the shelf. "Tell her the coffee's on the house, the pot's going stale," he'd say, when I tried to thank him. "So I'll say it to you. Leave the light on out here, honey. That's all the thanks anybody wants." Odell Suggs came from the hardware with a truck bed of split oak and a new pilot for the heater and would not take a cent. "Warmed 40 houses," he said. "I keep count. This is 41. He got the old furnace in the back running again while Theo worked beside him, the two of them not talking much, the older man showing the younger one how you bleed a gas line so it lights clean. Hollis, the slow deputy who had gone to school with Sam, came and stood in the lot and did not say much and fixed the sagging back door frame because it needed fixing, and he had brought the lumber. He measured twice and cut once and set the new jam plum, and when Nora thanked him he went red to the ears and said, "Your Sam gave me a job bussing tables the summer I flunked out and my daddy wouldn't have me in the house. I was 17. I'd have gone bad." He looked at the jam. "It's a good jam," he said, which was as close as Hollis came to saying anything about his own heart. Odell drove back up the highway at dusk to see, with his own eyes, the lamp lit in the window again from up close, and when he saw it, he took off his cap and stood in the lot a while, and then he got back in his truck and drove home without a word. And Nora understood that some thank yous are too big for the mouth. They came the way the ledger said they had always come, and she began, without deciding to write them down. A new cloth-bound book. Names and dates, and beside each one a single line in a hand that was learning to be blocky and careful. She was keeping the ledger. She had not planned to keep the ledger. It had simply been set down in front of her the way the whole diner had, and she had picked it up. Dale came back the second week, alone this time, without Renee, and she saw the change in him before he was out of the SUV. He had made his calls. He had learned about the trust. He stood in the lot where his brother-in-law had raked the gravel, and he had, for once in the 51 years she had known him, nothing to sell. "You knew," he said, "when I offered you 10. You already knew it couldn't be touched." "I found out after," she said. "But I'd have said no either way, Dale." He looked at the diner, and the woodpile Theo had split, and the smoke going up straight from the refitted furnace in the still cold air, and the lamp burning yellow in the window in the middle of the afternoon because she had stopped putting it out. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there in a long time. Something that might, in a better man, have grown into shame. He was displaced, not undone. He would drive back to the city and the house he had sold out from under her, and he would tell the story so that he came out of it fine. But for one moment, in the lot, he was quiet. "Sam never liked me," Dale said finally. "I never knew why. He liked everybody," Nora said. "That's how you knew." Dale left. Before he pulled out, he set an envelope on the window ledge, unmarked, and did not explain it, and drove down the highway and around the far bend and was gone. Inside the envelope, later she found a check. It was not an apology, because Dale did not have the words for one and never would. It was just a number written in his hand, and it was more than $10,000. And she understood it for what it was, the closest a man who counted everything could come to admitting he had once given away the only thing that mattered and called it worthless. She did not cash it for a long time. When she finally did, she put it in the coffee can. Prentice from the development group made 2 more calls and then stopped calling. His truck backed down the gravel apron one last gray morning and never pulled in again. The corner was safe. It had been safe for 24 years. It would be safe for as long as the law held, which her husband had judged, correctly, to be longer than the patience of any man in a quilted vest. The letter, the one she had opened alone the first morning after Dale's first visit, she kept folded in the front of the new ledger, and she read it on the hard nights. It was not long. Sam had not been a man of many words on paper any more than off it. "Nora," it said, "if you're reading this, you came up the road, and that means you needed to, and that means I was right to leave the light where you'd find it. Don't sell the corner. It can't be sold anyway, I saw to that, but don't let anybody talk you into being sorry about it. The money in the can is for the next one who comes off the highway with nothing. You'll know them. Feed them first. Ask them nothing. I know you thought, those last years, that you'd gone small on me, that you were only the one counting the pills. You were never small, Nora. You were the whole light. Keep it in the window. You don't light it for the night somebody comes. You light it for all the nights they don't." Sam, there was a night in December that tested all of it. A storm came up the valley faster than the radio had promised, wet snow turning to ice, and near midnight there were headlights swinging wild down the straight and then still, at an angle, in the ditch across the road. Nora was already pulling on Sam's canvas apron and his old coat over it before she had finished deciding to. Theo had the salt bucket and the tow strap out of the storeroom. They went across the iced highway together, slow, the lamp burning behind them in the window, and in the ditched car they found a young woman and a baby. Run off the road from a house she was leaving in the middle of the night with a split lip and $60. Driving nowhere, driving away, the way Nora herself had driven not so long ago. They brought her into the diner. Nora fed her first and asked her nothing, exactly as the letter said. She put the baby to sleep in the warm by the furnace, and she sat with the young woman in a booth until dawn while the ice ticked against the glass, and she did not leave her alone with it. In the morning she wrote it in the ledger. A name, a date, and the single word her husband had used, that she understood now from the inside, sat. When the woman tried to thank her, Nora heard her own mouth say the words before she had planned them. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just leave your light on, wherever you land." That's the whole of it, and she gave her $300 out of the coffee can, folded small, pressed into her hand at the car, and would not hear a word about paying it back, because that was not how the account was kept. Winter came in hard over the hills after that, and the diner held. Theo learned the grill and the furnace and the way the highway iced first on the bridge by the creek, and he stopped watching the door like an exit and started watching it like a thing that might bring someone he was glad to see. He asked her one evening, not looking up from the wood he was whittling, whether she thought Sam would have minded that Theo had come and stayed, and Nora set down her pen and told him the truth, which was that her husband had left the door unlocked for exactly one reason, and it was sitting in front of her holding a knife and a piece of cedar, and the boy had to go outside for a minute after that, and neither of them ever spoke of it again, which was how it was done. Bet Aldridge drove out on Sundays with legal pads and taught Nora how to run the charitable trust, so the ledger's work could go on being done after them both, a fund with a plain name, no plaque, so that the coffee can could keep feeding the next one off the highway forever. Marta and Odell and Hollis came and went, and the found family that her husband had quietly built out of the counties broken and rescued closed around his widow without anyone ever saying a word about it. Because saying it was not how these things were done. She kept the books. She was, it turned out, very good at the one thing the long sick years had thought too small to bother taking from her. She reconciled the past 34 years, and she opened the ledger on the next 34, and every evening, no matter the weather, no matter how tired, she cleaned the chimney and trimmed the wick and lit the kerosene lamp and set it in the window that faced the road. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been on the drive up, the one who had said out loud to the windshield that she would be gone by morning. That woman had been so tired of leaving. She had gotten so good at it, at not looking at the walls, at folding a life into a satchel and walking out clean. And the highway had done to her the one thing the numb months after the funeral never had. It had made her want to stay. Not out of duty, not because there was nowhere else. She stayed because the light had to be kept, and it turned out that keeping a light for other people is the only thing she had ever found that also, quietly, keeps you. She wrote to her son that winter, grown and gone into the city and half a stranger to her since the sickness had eaten all her years, and told him there was a place on the highway with his name on it, and the door was not locked, and she did not push, and she left the light on, and that was all a person could do. He wrote back by spring. It was a start. Sam, she thought, would have said a start was plenty. A start was a lamp, you did not need the whole sun. On the last evening of that first autumn, before the deep snows, Nora Vance stood on the swept walk at dusk with the letter in her coat pocket and the ledger under her arm, and she watched the light go out of the sky over the ridge. She was 54 years old. Behind her the furnace ticked, and Theo laid the counter for 3, because Bet was staying to supper. Odell Suggs's light burned steady up the highway in the hardware window, and out here her own light burned in the diner window to answer it. 2 small yellow points strung across the black straight of Route 9 like a sentence that had finally found its period. She thought of Marta's casserole and Odell's oak and Hollis's straight new jam and Bet's soft leather case and Theo's swept boards. And she thought that a man could be assessed at $1 and be the richest man the county ever held, and no county clerk, no developer, no brother with a good haircut had ever once been able to see it. She went in and blew across her cold hands and did not blow out the lamp. She never would again. A lamp isn't lit for the night someone comes. It's lit for all the nights they don't, so that it will already be burning on the one night they do.